On this week's episode of the Crowdfunding Nerds, we talk about gameplay loops, complexity versus simplicity, endless replayability, lifestyle games, small and large wins, and giving people what they want. Let's dive into it. Hey folks, this episode is brought to you by Hero Time Manufacturing. That is Hero Time, the numeral1.com. Coach Gleck has been a regular on our podcast. We highly recommend his services. He is a man of integrity. Hero Time, they can make anything. They've got competitive pricing, and they even do game prototypes. So make sure to check out Hero Time, numeral1.com. A link is in the show notes. And if you use the code Crowdfunding Nerds 101, you can get a 3% discount on your production through them. Let's get back into the episode.
Game begin.
Let's go.
Bring your pretty face to my ad.
Amazing.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I am your host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined as always by Sean, and we have a guest today of a different ilk. The Evan Gilcrest is actually one of my Deliverance playtesters and proofreaders. He's been super duper helpful for a really long time, and we had this idea for a podcast that explored highly rewarding gameplay loops and what makes them so viral. And in the organic spread of of games when they spread organically. And because he's a game player, I thought, man, this guy is going to be perfect to discuss this. And just kind of off the cuff was like, hey, you want to join? And he was like, sure. So here we are. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was pretty unexpected. That was a complete joke when you popped in and asked if anyone wanted to join, and I was included in anyone, so I figured I'd respond. But
Yeah. Well, sometimes you get places by just opening your mouth, right?
yeah, very good point.
Awesome. So the topic at hand, highly rewarding gameplay loops. Sean, you want to kind of start us off? What does that mean?
Yeah, so internally within our sort of crowdfunding node staff, we come across a video that was sort of exploring the success behind a recent sort of indie video game called Megabonk. And it's an indie, low budget, probably a one person, development team behind it. And it's right now competing against AAA titles on Steam. It's doing very well. So we kind of look at this as a case study, and we're trying to see what our influencers saying about it. Asmongold's covered it. There's been documentaries sort of about this as well. And from what we can really see, it's because this game has really it's got a very low price point, so it's easy to access for people that don't feel like they're taking a risk with it. And then it's got a very satisfying gameplay loop. So we wanted to talk about how this can relate to the tabletop industry, to crowdfunding. I think another thing that makes this particular title very interesting in terms of as a video game and the marketing sphere is that this developer has actually incorporated a lot of the techniques that we use in crowdfunding. So this person has, in their sort of organic marketing, has incorporated their community and their feedback within the marketing system itself, which is what we do in crowdfunding. Before we even go to Kickstarter or GameFound, we build the audience. We use that audience to help refine the game, refine the messaging and the imagery, and then you take it to market. And at that point, it's it's been iterated and it's good to go. So clearly, this person has done that with this particular game. So by the time it's got viral and it's spreading now, it's in a good place. So yeah, we want to kind of compare and contrast this indie developer and how it impacts crowdfunding, and then also talk about big game development versus small game development and everything in between.
Cool. So I guess the core idea is that a highly rewarding gameplay loop encourages people to play and makes people want to talk about your game with others. And so maybe a little bit of what I'd like to dissect is what makes a gameplay loop and what makes it highly rewarding. Separate those two things out. And so the gameplay loop itself is kind of the core process that you take to complete a round of the game, and that process repeats itself in a way that leads you toward the end game experience and the conclusion of the gameplay. So it's the like in World of Warcraft, it is you're level 1 and you need to kill low level kobolds and gain XP, and you find cruddy items, but they help you be slightly more efficient at surviving and defeating enemies, and then you gain a level, which gives you more stats, makes you more capable, allows you to fight level 2 and 3 boars in the forest, and then you defeat those boars and you level and gain new abilities. And over time, this leveling core experience of like kill stuff, level up, gain new skill, kill stuff, level up, gain new skill, or kill stuff, find items, level up, gain new skills, that eventually has you slaying dragons with 25 strangers in a giant raid at the end of the game, or
I think what's
other
key
things like that.
there is that nothing's changed, right? It's the exact same thing you did at level 1. It has a health bar, you're pushing abilities, you're positioning yourself, but it's just far more complex by the time you get to the end game. And I think maybe in terms of gameplay loops, rewarding gameplay loops, I think you have to scale complexity and difficulty. So at the very beginning, you kind of give them like a very easy task, right? Kill this thing. You basically auto attack it to death. Like it can't even defeat you. And then as as you level up and as you basically doing the same thing over and over, that complexity is scaling with your own skill level. And I think that's key, is getting that balance right. I think maybe one of the mistakes new game developers can do is that they just like dump a bunch of this complexity at the very beginning of that loop. It might be a very good loop, but it's just completely overwhelming for people. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, and it's just So I think part of gameplay is or mastering this gameplay loop is to try and scale that complexity curve and do it in such a way, assuming that the person coming to your game knows nothing about your game, never played a game before. And so I really feel you have to start like baby stairs. Like in Deliverance, I think it does as well. It's like move and attack. It's like you have two things you can basically do on your first turn in Deliverance, and it kind of does limit that. And then as you progress, you're getting armor and different things. It becomes a bit more complicated.
I think that's really important thing to focus on, is finding that balance of early complexity. Because for one, I would say I'm, mildly personally offended when I'm on social media and I see people say stuff about, they'll post some meme of someone falling asleep. It's like when someone breaks out a board game and starts to try to explain the rules, which is, as someone who, he's played a lot of board games and video games as well. Of course, you kind of get I don't know if there's a term for it, right? But you kind of get this carryover knowledge, like sense that this is like, you can compare the rules of a new board game in context to things you've played before. It reminds me of this, or it's kind of like this, and then and sometimes you can almost predict the way things are going to work. And for people who are brand new, right, who aren't drawing on anything like that, and also personality type wise, etc., aren't going to have a propensity for that sort of thing. Like, board games can be fun, you just got to try it one time and kind of got to convince them. But finding that balance of that complexity is really important, I think, because you have to balance, right? The more experienced players are going to not only going to be able to handle that early, but you don't want them to feel bored initially. Right. And you want to draw in the newer players because they start to learn those things, and the game becomes very fun and interactive, like seeing the different interactions and synergies between things you're doing.
Yeah, you look at a card game like Magic the Gathering, and that is so really, I guess the concept that comes to mind is you need to train your players to get better at the game. Like World of Warcraft did this, Magic the Gathering did this. Look at the cards in alpha and beta. You have which were the original Magic sets that came out. I think alpha was 1993, beta was 1994, and then unlimited was 95. And the cards in those sets were so basic and simple, like a 2 attack, 2 defense with flying for 4 mana or something like that. I was like, okay, I pay the mana and then I get this creature and I can use it to attack. And because it has flying, it can't be blocked. That's a lot of things, for a player to remember if they've never seen something like this. Now you've got like all these crazy. This unit has flying, vigilance, lifelink, and indestructible. And if you pay, blah blah, it's got some ability, and it's like a 9/10 for 2 mana, and but it has a huge drawback. And it's like all of these keywords are players just eat up the next set. They're like, oh, that's cool. What's the next mechanic? And, they know all the other mechanics. And when a new player comes to Magic, which is actually Magic the Gathering is probably one of the games growing at the fastest rate. The fastest it's ever grown. Like just by raw new players coming into the fold. You've got a lot of collectors and whatnot, of course, but a lot of new players too. And game stores are reporting highest sales and other things, because of Magic. And so I think that the player base that you have educated over time will themselves educate new players. So if you have, like, for example, yourself, Evan, you're a pretty experienced player of games, you get a game like Deliverance. You're like, okay, I can understand this and figure out what's good and whatnot. You play with a new player, they're going to be like, all right, I guess I'll just pray. But then there's a unit, like an enemy unit that's right in front of them with 1 health. And that's the last unit on the battlefield. You're like, what? I have an idea. And they just might not have the expertise to know there's the right move is to knock that thing out. And because you're there and you've played before, you might give them that suggestion. They take it. And then overall, they level up. They end up having a better experience overall because they win. And the whole snowball begins from that moment on. But that was because you were there to kind of share that with them. And they had no clue what they're doing, but they're just having fun. They're not sure if they should swing their sword or do something else. And, so I think that the players themselves, there's a lot to do with educating the player base so that you can include things like, in World of Warcraft, it used to be just stand in front of the thing and smack it until it falls over. Now there's fire on the ground. Smack the thing till it falls over, but avoid the fire. Oh, the guy has a special ability. I need to run away so that he does his big ground smash, and I don't want to die to the ground smash. And so then you start to kind of train players. And now World of Warcraft has mythic raids, which have one boss has like 25 different mechanics, and that's not an exaggeration. But it gets very complex, and it becomes something that new players can strive for. But it doesn't start out as so complex. And so it's I don't know, just kind of a bunch of thoughts crashing in at the same time. It feels like when a lot of the time when new designers create something, they want to create something that is rich as the experience that they, with Magic the Gathering, which is, been around since 1993. That's like, gosh, 32 years or 33 years. And you've got World of Warcraft, which has been out since 2004, which is 21 years. And so, you have to, and I've learned this with Deliverance, is like games that I just slaughter, if I make a scenario and I'm like, wow, I did really well, I could give that to new players and they would have a hard time. So the level of difficulty that I have to design for is have to really think about that.
Right.
And I think that complexity can also scare people away. People look at World of Warcraft and they see these, UIs that some raid leaders have with all these boxes and there's like timers and it looks like a big mess. That doesn't really evoke people saying, oh, I really want to learn how to play this. I think it kind of puts people off saying, oh gosh, I need like an engineering degree to play this game. And I think that's actually been the death spiral of WoW. It's put itself in the stage where it's so complex at the end game that only the kind of most hardcore dedicated players can actually appreciate and enjoy that experience, whilst all the newcomers are just not going to invest in that. And I think it's something that I've been thinking about as well, is that, complexity as a game designer doesn't make your game better. Sometimes I think a good game designer is trying to keep things simple and streamlined, and complexity is good if it enriches the experience, if it adds strategic depth. But if it's complexity for the sake of complexity, then it can become, I think it's a sign of bad game design, and particularly with board games or any type of physical thing.
Hey, crowdfunding nerds, if you're looking for an awesome fulfillment partner for US shipping, you should really consider Bridge Distribution and Fulfillment. I personally use them. I've used them for multiple projects. They do such a great job. They also can fulfill Amazon orders and get you prepped for Amazon and their warehousing team. I have been so happy using Bridge Distribution. I'm really proud that they're sponsoring us. If you reach out, bridgedist.com, that's bridgedist.com, let them know we sent you. All right, now back to the show.
You know, we talked a lot about WoW a little bit, and the one of the things that I can say particularly about World of Warcraft as an example of gameplay loop, and what Sean was saying about what he called the death spiral of WoW is that the things that you learn early on in the game have largely that early on in the game's design as well, in terms of its development and release in its history, I should say, have become more and more obsolete. So the quintessential experience that you described earlier, Andrew, is like leveling up, starting at level 1 and killing some basic enemies and leveling up, and that micro gameplay loop of the combat of attacking an enemy and using your abilities and getting the reward from defeating that enemy. And in modern WoW especially, as an example of a larger design philosophy, they've kind of abandoned that gameplay loop, in the fact that you can purchase maximum level boosts, which comes along with a bunch of other problems. You don't learn the gameplay loop of your own class selection, for example. You end up at max level with a bunch of these abilities. You have no idea what they do. So there's your complexity, right? That you're dumped into the middle of that complexity. But it's always been a little bit of a difference in gameplay loop, that even from the early years of something like WoW, where the leveling experience and the end game experience are fundamentally the same until a point, like leveling up and getting rewards from things you're defeating to kind of level up more effectively to be able to defeat more powerful enemies, is kind of squished at the top end, where you're, instead of leveling up, you're just getting better and better gear, basically, to be able to better defeat the things that give you the good gear. And those things are a different version, but the same core of that gameplay loop. And just really quickly, like Sean said, that death spiral modern WoW, they've kind of eliminated the basic version of that, right? You can buy a boost to max level, and then you just start doing the end game content, which is to get vertically scaled, but not necessarily laterally scaled, where you're getting more things you can do, because you have all the things you can do. You just need the numbers to do them better. And so removing that, it's kind of a good example of removing that base level that was built upon, of the quote unquote complexity, the very simple level of that gameplay loop, makes the end game very pointless, because it becomes the only thing. And the other thing that jumped out to me was that this is a very RPG focused kind of way of thinking, but there are many ways, right, that you can develop a gameplay loop that is inherently rewarding. And there's that meta progression of leveling up in an RPG, where the gameplay loop is actually watching the enemy's health go down and watching your health hopefully not go down, and getting a reward from that. But I think of other games, and the way you were describing the deliverance, like the new player, where they might not attack an enemy that's right in front of them, and sometimes that's so unoptimal, or might lead to a loss. And sometimes there are alternative ways to enjoy the game, right? Because at the end of the day, a game should be fun. There's less about right ways to play the game sometimes. And to mention Megabonk, I one of the best kind of runs that I had was not necessarily I had kind of failed to get a lot of damage, but I was like, well, what else can I do? I can get a bunch of evasion and lean into this extra health that I'm getting from this item and stuff like that. And then I spent 5 minutes kind of laughing as I was spam pushed and rocketed around the end boss stage, because the enemies have collision and they'll push you around and stuff, but they couldn't hit me, so they couldn't damage me. So I was just kind of waiting for the inevitable end when my dodge chance failed. But there's I'm sure there's some optimal build, and you'll see there's a leaderboard on the home screen where you can see the number of the enemies, the top people have defeated. And I wasn't anywhere close to that, but it was still fun, right? Because you've got the core gameplay loop in a different sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all sorts of other board games like Mysterium is a good example, I think, one that I have, and Dixa that I've heard of that I've never played, where there's an objective to the game in terms of like winning and getting points, or completing some objective, but the gameplay loop itself is a personal thing almost. It's like it's how you're relating to the things you're, the moves you're making or the cards that you're describing. And like in Mysterium is a great example of kind of parallel thinking with different people. Like everyone has very different ways of thinking if you've never played a game like that. It's very hard to give clear instruction. You're kind of giving, I don't know if you guys have ever played, but it's kind of like a murder mystery, and you provide these one player, it's asymmetrical, and one player provides these vision cards that have very kind of neat, whimsical art on them. And there might be like 3 or 4 main points to that you could pick out of the image, and you're trying to match it to, say, a location card, like a picture of a room or a picture of a person who could be the murder suspect. And the challenge there, right, is like, well, how can I make this obvious for the person, or how does this person think, and what do they find interesting that they might latch onto? So like, oh, there's some armor in this picture, and there's a sword in this one that I can match up, like, or there's the red keeps coming out in this art piece, and I can, and there's a bakery full of cakes with cherries on them or something like that match up there. And that's very different, right? That's very different from a traditional like RPG combat experience gaining type gameplay loop. But I would say more casually, like those are the sort of things my friends will call to pull out, whenever they come over, because I'm much more of a kind of an in-depth gamer and they're more casual. So
Yeah. It's fun because actually you made me think of Jamie Stegmaier's new game that came out recently called Vantage, which I got my first physical look at in back in Strong Tower Con when we went there with our team. It's this game that you try to each player is sitting at at the table, but they're in the game, they're almost like they had to parachute out of a plane that was going down, and they all parachuted in at different times, and so they get to different places, and the only thing they have is like a walkie-talkie that still connects. And so you're all kind of around this at different places of this island, this mysterious island. And so one person could be at the beach, one person could be like looking at a mountain in the background with a plane in front of them or whatever. And you have your kind of mission is, it involves describing where you are and hearing other people describe where they are. So eventually you may, as the game progresses, you might make it to that location where, now I made it to the beach where you were, but the way I describe it is like, well, there are these treasure boxes that are floating in the ocean, and there's a forest in the background. I'm on the sand and whatever, but maybe the the other player focuses more on the mountains that were in the background and whatever. And it could mean that I don't even realize that I'm at the same location that they were, and it's a really fun experience. I think another game that does this really well is The Crew, where you get, you all are working together, you've got this objective, and you're basically playing a game of spades, trying to satisfy a particular condition. Like, we need to make sure that the first player gets the red 5, or that the red 5 is out as the first card. And it's an interesting, just the people make that game interesting in the way that they think. But kind of going back to this concept of the core of the gameplay and World of Warcraft, which you brought up such a good point, Evan, about how they give you the opportunity to skip ahead. And what I find, when in a game like WoW or any MMO, end game is the only thing that truly matters to players. And so the end game, there's a different core gameplay loop. It's a little kind of maybe modified core gameplay loop. There's no more leveling up, but it is what I refer to as the gear treadmill. You get a list you get all your gear from defeating enemies, or in PvP, you get all your gear from playing Battlegrounds and Arena and whatever, and then a new season comes out or a new raid dungeon comes out, and it completely all of the gear in that new location or that new system is better now. So you have to now reacquire higher levels, more powerful types of armor and weapons and stuff in order to do the exact same thing that you were doing. If you wanna like win, then your numbers need to be higher. So in order for your numbers to need to be higher, you have to get new items that we just released. So it's this weird treadmill. You feel like you're running on this treadmill. You could go really fast or you could go really slow, but it's like a hamster wheel that just runs in a circle. And every once in a while, in fact, I played WoW for 11 years. I realized that I was awesome and at the top of the heap. And a month later, a new patch is coming out with all this new gear. And in order to maintain my spot at the top, I'm going to have to do all this work to get gear that gives me, 10 more health and, 2% more crit chance. And, it's like, why am I going to do all of this just for bigger numbers or to kind of maintain my position at the top of the heap? It's very frustrating when you realize what's actually happening to you is that they're sapping you slowly. They're draining your life force 1 month at a time. You're sitting in the chair, getting nowhere.
And I think that's the problem if you create a game that never ends. And WoW was designed to be a game that never ends. But I think ultimately all games end because, as you said, Andrew, you get that gear, you kind of get to the top of the ladder, and then you're like, okay, there's literally nothing else to do. I'm just waiting for the next patch so I can do it all over again. I guess I've defeated the game. Because I actually season 3 is when I was sort of at my apex in terms of retail WoW, and after that I went to private servers. I just played competitively on private servers, and that's very interesting because it does exactly that. It skips all of the kind of core gameplay of the game itself and only focused on end game, and everyone essentially has the same gear. So the only thing that really separates you is cosmetics, and cosmetics then become a way to basically show that you're better at the game, and it all becomes about status then. So not only do you have on these private servers the ranking on the ladder, you also had special gear that had transmogging before it was even available on retail. And it was modified World of Warcraft, and people got a lot better at the game because, for example, dueling. After a duel, all your cooldowns automatically reset, full health, so you could literally endlessly duel. You didn't have this downtime. While in retail, it might take a couple of minutes before you're back to full health and you've got a cooldown back. So people were just like hopping around dueling, and people got far more better because you just get more duels in a day. And the same with arena, the instant queues, because there's just so much more of a population. So I think that's one of the things people need to keep in mind in terms of complexity. Is I think people want to make the games complex because they want to create this aura of your game never ending, and I actually think that's bad for game design. I always remember the expression. I'm watching a documentary about the creators of Avatar: Legend of Aang, and the creator said, he says that all stories should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They should end and not have a never-ending story. Because if someone came up to you and say, "Hey, I've got this really cool story I want to tell you," it never ends. Do you want to hear it? Like, no, I don't want to hear your never-ending story. Like, everyone loves a kind of a satisfying conclusion. And I look back to the games I've played. Some of the most memorable games I've played are ones that have ended. Like, I think of the Valve games. Like, all Valve games are single player games which end. You have this experience, it's very memorable, and then it ends, and then you play it again because you enjoyed the experience so much. I think that's the sign of a good game. Is like, yes, I want to experience that experience again, not that I want like endlessly replayable. I also think maybe it's a bit presumptuous to think that people are going to endlessly play your game. So I think a lot of maybe game designers fall into this trap. I need to create a game that's endlessly playable. And I think they then use us as their marketing push. And I don't think people care that your game is endlessly playable, because the reality is they're not going to endlessly play it. I think you'll be stressing if they get 5 plays, and then they probably will sell it or just sell it on their shelf, and they might play it in a blue moon. But I think that if you maybe have the approach as a game developer and as a marketer saying, my game isn't trying to be everything. It's not going to be, it's not going to be endlessly replayable. I want it to have this very specific experience and have I want people to have fun in this very specific way. And if they play it, 5 times and then sell it, great, they've got their money's worth. And I think that's going to really help narrow that gameplay loop. And because I think you can have like complexity creep where your game is trying to be everything, and then it becomes this huge sandbox, which again, there's a place for that. But I think that can also be intimidating for people to jump into.
Yeah, I think one thing that really jumps out to me is, as we talked about WoW a little bit, and then thinking about in a board game sense, is that the problem with something like World of Warcraft, especially in its current state, but even it's just been accelerated, like right, the internet and like online guides and like metas that get established are kind of accelerate all this to an endpoint, and instead of taking a lot more time to get there, it makes the content feel less full, like it just kind of people kind of get through it.
Yeah.
Is that there's kind of a lack of meaningful challenge and a lack of randomness in something like World of Warcraft. So I was thinking about the most recent time that I played retail World of Warcraft with my friends was a year or so ago, and I remember at the end game, like the raid being kind of interesting for the challenge, but the way to get there being things like Mythic Plus, if anyone knows that term, is just like queue up, spam one of 6 whatever dungeons that like provide you like number rated gear. So you choose a difficulty level of what you're going to do. So the difficulty doesn't come from the unique challenge, the unique interactions you're having, specific mechanics, other than like a set of things like you remember for everything, like don't stand in stuff on the ground, like wait for, use your defensive cooldown here. And it just becomes, the gameplay loop becomes an optimization of how well can I do these things to get get the gear that gives me better numbers, to do a raid that gives me better numbers. And there's no randomness there, right? So I'm kind of honing in on this balance between randomness. It's like, why do people play, at least for a long time, it's like, why did people play Monopoly over and over, right? It's like, it doesn't really change that much. But sometimes you get the good properties, and sometimes you roll and avoid your opponent's properties and you win, right? And so it's this lack of randomness in something like World of Warcraft, and this constant randomness in something like Monopoly, where you can find that in Deliverance. It's like sometimes you hit, you might do a general skirmish game and you open up 2 map tiles, and it's like you got, imps and gargoyles. I did earlier. It was a very simple solo game. Okay, pretty straightforward. This time I rolled, abominations and incendiary imps, and I died because like I just got kind of, unlucky. But those are the sort of things where it's like, but what if I had hit just the thing I needed to beat that challenge that kind of came out of nowhere? And that's where, talking about the game, like the games that end, you're going to have those games that might be replayable for novelty in terms of like, oh, here's a path you didn't do in a story type game, or here's, there's plenty of examples of story games where like, oh, did you get this ending, or did you get the true ending? Did you do the special stuff to unlock this? And for games like that aren't kind of infinitely replayable or much more replayable, that's an important mindset to keep, is that like there's going to be an end. And then for those things that are kind of balance, because World of Warcraft, I would say, is like you said, the game that never ends, that kind of archetype. You have a company that's babysitting it and constantly putting out new content for it, because there is no randomness, because there's no novelty to the experience if you just do the experience over and over with no randomness. And so, especially with something like a board game, which you can't really, unless you're Everdell, as much as I love that game, I look at the expansions, that none of which I have, and I'm like, well, should I get one of them or should I get 6 of them? Because there are like a million of them. Unless you're doing that constantly, right? You want that balance for something that can't be constantly babysat with new experience, of novelty through the game, the design, and the gameplay loop and the fun therein, and the randomness you're getting, where it's that, not to be too, I don't know, hedonistic or something about it, but it's like, it's that bit of a safe gambling, or just like, but what if I did hit that thing? What if I hit that roll and I got the skill that I needed, and I want to try that build next time, and so those things that come in, and even with something that's less numbers or dice kind of randomness based, with Mysterium as an example, or those kind of interpretive, more story games, it's like what about these ones I drew this time? Like that's going to be totally different with the people I played with, and they're thinking different things, right? That's where the randomness comes from, is the people you're playing with, or the cards you happen to hit. And I think getting that balance right of a good amount of content and a rewarding gameplay loop with a probability or randomness that kind of keeps you from experiencing it all too quickly, is where you get the replayability and something that you can't babysit and continue to create new content for.
Yeah, it's funny because I think about all of these types of games that end up in the end like gear treadmills. World of Warcraft being my, main one of my main I guess the main offenders in this area. But then things like Magic the Gathering, you get you buy all the cards, you get the right sets and whatnot. I remember I played from like 1998 to about 2008 pretty hard. I had all the cards that you would want to have. And I could play at the time what is called, I believe now is called Legacy, which I had all the Power 9 cards, I had all the dual lands, I had all the fancy stuff. And then, but I would play standard, or I believe it's called modern now. Type 2 is what they called it at the time. But you play with like the last 2 years worth of cards that have come out are the cards that you're allowed to use in the in this format. And it's the typical tournament format that has world championships, stuff like that. They came out with a bunch of other formats as well, like Commander, which is cool, but it's a gear treadmill in a different way. So I joke and I say the most powerful card in a collectible card game is the American Express card or the credit card, because you're 1 year from now half your cards rotate out and you can't use them anymore. So in order to keep playing at in those formats, you need to keep spending, which is
Yeah, it's like
really important.
it's a hidden subscription, essentially.
Yes, yeah. So while it feels really good when you're there and it's super fun, it's like, man, 4 months from now or 3 months from now, there's another set that comes out that I'm going to need to invest in, a couple of boxes for the cards. And if you don't invest early, then the card that you want is going to be ridiculously expensive. And, buying singles is not always the right move, but you're spending a lot of money, just to kind of keep up. And that's why I look at World of Warcraft and Magic as what I call lifestyle games, where that is the one game you play. If you play League of Legends or if you play World of Warcraft or whatever, it's hard to play those games casually and be good. And I think everybody that plays games, they want to win, generally in some form or fashion. They're playing to win. In World of Warcraft, you can kind of redefine what winning means for you. One guy actually hit max level by picking flowers. It was super funny. And it's like, well, that was fun to him, I guess. I don't know. But then others will hit, max level, want to hit rank 1 in the world in PvP and win a big tournament or something like that. Well, that's winning to them. But these types of games, these big ones that are very successful, I think a lot of players, and I'm going to even expand it to classics that really kind of train game designers. So there's like a lot of people listening to this will be designing games or working on their game, marketing their thing or whatever. They've been trained by games like World of Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering. There are so many other games like Diablo that has been highly impactful. StarCraft, Warcraft, those types of RTS experiences, Command and Conquer, Age of Empires, a bunch of different games that you could consider each one kind of like a lifestyle game, that if you played that's the only one you played. You play it competitively online and it's like your thing. In board games, when you translate that to board games, there are some disconnects. Like you have games that you'll play that feel like so like in Deliverance, for example, I wanted to make a boss fight feel kind of like a raid boss that you would fight in WoW. I wanted it to replicate the experience of fighting a giant raid boss with unique mechanics from kind of a different position. You've got a different combination of characters now. You've got different abilities that you have to use, but it's the same boss kind of with some nuances to each fight. And the overall feeling, I wanted to be that of World of Warcraft. But one thing that I kind of cut early on from my thinking was that people would play this like infinitely, like World of Warcraft. I figured I give people a certain number of bosses. There were like 6 bosses in the game, plus one more that you would unlock during the campaign as like the final boss. And in the original game, I remember playtesting about 2,000 times, like the skirmish mode, what I would call the quote unquote infinitely replayable mode. You've got different map tiles, different, enemy combinations, different characters, and the combinations of their skills that you would gain would be very different every single run. And the boss that you would fight would have different effects. And as you got stronger, the demons, their behavior would actually begin to change every single game that you played. And then I created after that whole system and all that work, was like years of effort. I created a campaign that was like, I thought I'm going to make a decent campaign where you end up like kind of at maximum power. And Evan, to your point, like there's reduced randomness. You get to choose the skills that you play and whatnot. It was a different way to approach it. And 3/4 of my player base loves the campaign. They prefer the campaign to any other mode of play. I thought I'll just give them unique and interesting scenario combinations that could theoretically happen. And then I went a little bit further with unique bosses in the campaign and whatnot that were actually printed in the book. But hindsight, it was just like I don't know, like a very sudden decision that I decided, let's just add a campaign. It shouldn't take too long. And it was by far people's most appreciated thing. And I had one guy who was a really big fan of the original Deliverance. It delivered about 2 years ago. And he just finished the 14 mission campaign. And he's like a huge fan, loves the game and everything. This is like an average of maybe a game every 2 months that he played, probably played half a dozen games right away and then let it rest for a year and then played a couple more. And we're like, oh, I only have 2 or 3 more games left before the finish of the campaign. And he will talk about it with his friends. He's, sold multiple copies of this game of Deliverance for me just because he's talked about it positively. He's backed both Kickstarters. He's been super duper excited about it, but he's got his 14th play in, finally finishing the campaign for the first time. And I find most of our players, I'll have, if the campaign is 14 missions, the majority of our players will play at least 6, and which is a really great number for me. So I thought, okay, what I need to do for this next expansion, like when we're doing the expansion, I need to give people really interesting and like memorable experiences within the first 6 missions. That's like the statement of the game isn't made at the very end when you unlock the boss and you open up the final box and that kind of thing. I want to give people a box to open earlier than that. I want to give people other possible choices that can make like early on. It's like, oh, we went left instead of right, and therefore we can't play this mission and have to play that one. And that kind of thing. It's a so I don't think of our game as being infinitely replayable, but I do think one thing valuable for me is like the start of the game and like what kind of tantalizes players to buy the game is that there are like a variety of starting places that look interesting. So like for Deliverance, it's really all about the characters that you play. So we've got this in our new expansion, we've got this epic Viking that throws axes and does cool things with the axes on the ground. We've got this winged lion that you could like chase enemies around the battlefield and stalk enemies. We've got this very like a spear wielding, almost like a mermaid that throws her harpoon and like impales fools, and it's really fun and sings and like a siren in a way, but a lot of different variety, and people will find a particular character and be like, oh, this one's my character. And I remember during our Kickstarter I released an update with a new character. It's like, oh, no, that one's my new character, that one's the new main I'm going to try, and it makes them really excited. And a lot of the time when people play the game, they're going to decide their favorite character, and then the replayability is that they have these like, 15 other characters that they can pick for next run. And I don't know which one I'm going to pick for next time, but I'm excited. They've got these choices. So infinite replayability, I think, is a misnomer, but people do like to have like options, meaningful choice.
I think, in fact, on that point with what you mentioned about the campaign and how you said 3/4 of it, of the player base, that was their favorite part. I think that's call it a happy accident or whatever, but it's kind of a little bit of the hidden genius or something of something like Deliverance, is that I think there are cases where, and another example that I'll give for this is anyone who's played Risk of Rain or Risk of Rain 2. It's kind of a Megabonk-like game. You have more control. You're not just moving around. You're actually shooting and using your abilities. But is where to go from something like the skirmish and Deliverance, and I'll get to the Risk of Rain thing in a second, but where you're randomly turning up demons, right? And you're randomly drafting talents, and randomly drawing treasures, like into a campaign where you're filling out a sheet that's giving you specific bonuses you're choosing, and you're picking out your talents out of all the ones that you have available. Is that I think it gives people a sense of like being able to cheat the system. Like that, in a way, there's a bit of a, not in a bad way, but there's a little bit of an adversarial, like, oh, I get to look ahead instead of having to play 50 games to finally roll that build I wanted to try, like earnestly. I get to do that and do it in these special campaign missions. And the Risk of Rain thing too, like you usually get random items, but there are certain commands you can enable where you have like the artifact of command where it'll drop a little ball, and you have an interface menu where you can pick any item in the game of that rarity. And if you did that over and over, you'd be like, okay, I've built the strongest thing, every time for the last 10 games that I've run. But and then you go back to the randomness. But I think part of that is like people get a look behind the curtain in terms of like, oh, I get to try exactly what I'd want. But and it gives you an extra outlet for that, where you'll still want to go back to the randomness at a certain point, because at least me in particular, I really like, one of the things I've developed, I think, is a respect for and appreciation, enjoyment of kind of randomness in terms of, in playing games, of seeing what happens and trying to overcome that challenge, even if it's self-imposed. Like if I played a game regularly and I'm playing with new people or playing, cooperatively, even in Deliverance, I'll try to sometimes pick out a thing to do that isn't necessarily going to be directly, it's like if you were playing a D&D game. Like if you're the most experienced player, you might want to play the high charisma character and run every encounter and make it go smoothly with good, persuasion and intimidation rolls and stuff like that. But sometimes you want to let the new players get that experience of what a story looks like, right? Not every story is a success. Sometimes you win encounters, sometimes you lose, sometimes you end up in jail, right? You're thrown in jail because you failed to bribe a guard in D&D or something like that. And letting that quote unquote unoptimization like take form. Like I've really become that sort of player in certain games where I'm like, I'm gonna kind of impose this. Like Everdell's a good example. I'm like, what kind of thing can I do? In Everdell, you build a city out of these locations and these critters, and they all have different aspects. They all have different like colors, basically, which focus on what they give you. And a lot of the ones that are green will just kind of give you extra resources. And through the course of the game, those green ones get activated over and over again a couple extra times. And so we'll play a game where I'll see, I'll let everyone build the city they want. And I'm like, okay, mine, I'm going to try not to use any greens. I'm going to try to and kind of self-impose these challenges where you're adding that, you're adding those emergent interactions in yourself. And a good game is something that in terms of that really lets that happen automatically. Like I don't even have to do that myself. And I see that in Deliverance, where it's like, even what we were looking at earlier when you popped into the call with some of the Angels towns we were taking a look at, was like, we have to design this in the idea, both in the case where someone's going to use it in a campaign where they pick out exactly what sort of build they want to use, and it's really strong if you put these things all together. But also when you're pulling them out randomly and you're looking at this versus another one, would I ever take this over another random one? Is it that good if I don't get the other ones that I want to mix it with? So adding in those modes where you kind of get to cheat the RNG a little bit, and you get to pick exactly what you want, and then or impose challenges on yourself to kind of keep things novel are one thing that you've done kind of brilliantly, whether it's accidental or not, with Deliverance, and that I find enjoyment in other games. So
what I'm really hearing is giving people what they want. So to go back to the WoW example, PvP was added as an afterthought. So we'll just add that, and that became a huge staple within WoW. In fact, I think they didn't invest in that enough, because you eventually have people breaking off and creating League of Legends, and the people behind League of Legends played WoW Arena, and they specifically created it because they wanted something that was a bit more competitively balanced. So, and Andrew, in your case, you could have easily said, well, no, I created a skirmish game and it's going to be a skirmish game. But no, like in your expansion, you lean into what the community wants, which is more campaigns, and you're using information. So I'm kind of curious, because why is Flip 7 so popular all of a sudden? If you go to like Board Game Geek, like the most played game, I think it's because it's easy to play, it's quick. But I think people broadly in the tabletop industry are maybe looking for things which are less complex or just are easier. And I think it's because, and we've seen this in the video game industry as well, where like AAA games, it's almost like the more expensive it is, the worse quality it's going to be, because it's too ambitious. And because it's so ambitious, it's not going to live up to the expectation. I think it's the same with tabletop games now, where you have games which have these huge campaigns and all these miniatures, and we've all heard of horror stories of people backing these big projects and they're not fulfilling because they're too ambitious. So I feel like maybe people are more, there's like a reaction to this, and people are generally wanting now games which are less complex, more kind of certain, give me that kind of consistent experience that I'm looking for, and I can put it away. And I'm interested to see how the industry develops to this. But I think generally knowing what people are thinking and giving them what they want, I think is going to be key to the success of any game developer.
Yeah, I see that trends change over time, and you can always make something that kind of supersedes what a typical the typical trend advice that you might receive. Like, for example, back in the day, it used to be like miniatures. If you add minis to your game, you're going to make more money because people love minis. Well, now there are so many games that have minis, and you'll still hear people say that, but they're casual fans that are like, I just see games on Kickstarter and GameFound making lots of money, and they have miniatures, and that's where that advice comes from. Well, in actuality, they're like, you'll hear in the next breath, I have 900 games with miniatures that I need to paint. And I know that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but for myself, I love campaign games that require a commitment, that you invest over time, you build like your character and a little empire and whatnot. But I have a number of those waiting on my shelf. Like I've got, I have Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era, which is really great. Played that a bunch, and that actually caused me to take a break from Isafarian Guard, which I'm still waiting to start campaign 5 in Isafarian Guard. But then I have Iridia, which is some other game, another game that's like a big campaign game. Can't wait to play that. But am I really gonna buy another campaign game while I have one that's gonna take 150 hours to play and beat? And I haven't even opened the box yet. Is as a collector of things, I'm thinking like I would rather be a player, not a collector, and so I'm going to hold off on those types because I have a lot of that. Now, what I don't have a lot of, and is where I turn my attention to, I don't have a lot of games that I really like to play that give me that kind of experience I'm looking for in under an hour, and in 1 hour or less, right? So I have 7 children, and it's difficult for me to get a game to the table that takes 3 hours to play. Deliverance is a great example. One of the reasons I love the campaign so much is because I can play a mission in 45 minutes. It's like that's exactly right. I can break the game out, set it up, play a game, put it away, and I haven't spent 4 hours. If you play a skirmish mode, that'll take 2 hours, or whatever, depending on your player count. But so that's actually one of the reasons that I tend to favor the campaign, even though skirmish I think is kind of the pinnacle of skill. Like if you're really good at skirmish at the highest difficulty, it's like super fun. But yeah, so when I'm making my next project, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about how long is it going to take out fiddliness is another big problem with a lot of games that are
Yeah.
of the type I like. You've got a bunch of different token types, and this stack goes here, and those cards go there, and a bunch of different things to set up before you even get to play the game. It's like 30 minutes. Gloomhaven is probably one of the biggest offenders of this. But I think that what I'd like to have a game that starts quickly and for me, I'm making a kind of an RTS inspired game. And it's one that needs to start quickly. It needs not to afflict me with analysis paralysis where I need to find every single end game build possible and decide which route I want to go or how I want to level. And it needs to give like that rich end game experience of an RTS at the end where I can nuke my enemies or whatever, and that experience all needs to be contained within a 1 hour time frame. And so it's a big challenge, but I think that as long as you have your kind of core, what you want from a game, I think you can design toward that. And I think that the right types of players will tend to, jump on board. But yeah, I think the kind of the last thing I'd really like to hear your guys' perspective on is, one of the things, I'll use an example from Angelcraft. So we came back from the convention. We said, okay, people really like this, the enemy deck building. It's one thing that people really liked. And then one of the guys that actually didn't get to come with us to the convention, he has been working on it. He said that, hey, maybe we give players 3 different decks, and the first deck will be like an aura card, and you'll switch that every single round. And then the next deck will be like a spiritual warfare card, and that'll be a passive, like a gambit of can you do it before your opponents do it, and that'll change gameplay every round. And then there'll be the other deck that you draw every single turn that is like the normal deck. I'm thinking like, man, that's why use 3 decks when you can just use 1 deck? And it's like, why not use 10 decks? Why not use 100? Because the level of complexity of just using 1 more deck than you needed, it ruins the core gameplay loop. It's like, I would like every player to take a turn, and then I would like to draw 1 card for the enemy. I want that to be the loop. And then, of course, at the end of the round, you will recruit units, and the enemies will get stronger, and then you're going to do it again. That type of experience, that loop, seems really simple to activate for players. If we all have like, whatever high level, Cray supercomputer processes in our brain, then sure, maybe, I mean, that's an old example. I don't know how fast those are now, but we're going to be able to process that information. But humans can only remember 5 to 9 things at a time. And so 3 decks already with 2 things that are ongoing passive negative effects. It's like my brain is already mostly full. So how am I going to actually figure out what it is that I want to do? How am I going to enjoy this experience? Do you guys have that opinion? Or what do you guys think about that?
No, I completely agree because, as you know, I've been developing Cypherpunk, and that's something I've really been spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to get the first couple of rounds to be getting people used to the kind of core loop that grows in complexity as you play. I think it's really important, and I do. I do have recognized this playing certain games where you forget that there's some type of lasting effect, and then you finish the round like, oh yeah, I forgot that entire round I was supposed to do this, and what do we do? Do we just kind of go back, or you kind of have like this kind of bad taste in your mouth because you're like, oh, am I playing the game properly? And I don't know if I'm actually meeting the challenge. So that's something that I've had to try to think of. But yeah, I completely agree. I think if things can happen, if there can be immediacy and like negative effects, that you can just resolve and then you continue the game, I think that's good. So I always sort of favor games where you just take damage instead of like you're slowed. It's just like, if it's like it just makes the game longer, I'd rather have like more of a binary experience in terms like you win the game, you lose the game, you take damage. So that's something I've been thinking of. But I think again it comes down to this idea of complexity. I looked at a lot of shelf side reviews. Shelfside do these reviews of various board games, and what's very good is that they timestamp them, and they always highlight things they don't like. And I actually think as a game developer, that's more important than things they do like. Because if you can get rid of the things they don't like, or you find commonalities and things that gamers do not like, and you strip that from your game, you're probably going to have a better chance of creating a game that people actually enjoy. And one thing I constantly saw coming up in there, the kind of negative things about various games, was fiddly components. There's things being fiddly. For cooperative games, it was like quarterbacking where other players, are jumping in and telling you how to play. That's something that I think naturally happens. And the other thing is like just language on cards not being clear. So I think if you can like create a game that has clear language, reduces quarterbacking, and doesn't have fiddly components, I think you're going to be like in the top maybe 10% of games just by eliminating those things.
Yeah, it really, sounds pretty similar to what I was thinking. I really was kind of focusing in on, in terms of avoiding complexity, unnecessary complexity, right? It kind of reminds me of, if that's Shakespeare or whoever, like, don't use 10 words if 5 will do. I think the place to find depth and complexity is in the overarching options in a game in terms of design and the world, the setting you're creating, if that's relevant. But the place to remain simple, and the thing that kind of keeps in my mind getting distilled out of all these examples is to align the gameplay loop and the advancement of the player in size of like small to larger wins. And I think this really applies in like an example. For example, Deliverance, your small wins are like you're using what you start with, right? You have there's difference in complexity for what you're starting with in Deliverance, right? You have like 3 actions and a prayer that you can make. In, like you're saying, Gloomhaven, or I've played Frosthaven, you might have started with 3 different characters and they all have 10 different cards they can play on a turn, 2 of which you have to pick out. So the complexity can change there based on the initial options you're giving. But in terms of building, like in Deliverance, you're gonna get a small win by eliminating a demon and get some XP, and that will lead to a slightly larger win of, okay, now I get to spend that for a treasure or a talent. And again, like in Everdell, like your small win might be, I've started out with these workers and I get a couple resources and I get a green, and like that's not going to win me the game because this gives me 1 point. There's a point system to all the buildings, but it's going to give me that one more resource to get a slightly larger win, right? And building upon those kind of small advancements, those like small to large wins, is where you want to find that core gameplay loop in terms of keeping it as simple as possible, right? What do I need at a base level to get to that next biggest win? And they just build on top of each other and create a completely novel experience based on, if it's Deliverance or Everdell or whatever, like the combination of things that you were constrained by, right? The randomness that you got there, what cards are available on the table, what demons you're fighting against, what talents you happen to open up. And that's where you get the complexity. You get the novelty through randomness, but not because you have to like, oh, here's 10 demons surrounding you on the battlefield. Which one are you going to attack? Like which one's the right one to kill? Like that's needlessly complex, right? Where you're just making decisions that could be simplified, where the meat of the decision isn't in the number of options you're given. It's in the outcomes of those options. So yeah, kind of ordering those things, I think it seems pretty consistent across all these games I'm thinking about, is like ordering your wins from small to larger, and keeping it minimal as to what it takes to get to the next level.
Yeah, I think also your core gameplay loop for those that are first time designers, you need to make sure that if the players are engaging with your core gameplay loop, they're bringing the game to its conclusion. So, for example, Deliverance, you want to defeat demons, gain XP, get new items so that you can defeat demons better, gain more items or new skills and whatnot. Eventually, the demons get pretty gnarly, and you've got like a huge boss that like, can you beat that guy? And you're a very very strong dude or dudette at the very end. The core gameplay, if I were to say, oh, you don't gain XP for defeating demons, instead you're going to gain XP for doing these quests, for helping these citizens across this, walk the old lady across the street, and now you get but you don't get any XP for defeating demons. Well, defeating demons are what bring about the end of the game. You win the game if you defeat all the demons. So I need to tie the reward system to the core gameplay loop by saying, player, this is what I want you to do, rather than giving you an instructions to say like, oh, make sure you defeat the demons because that's how you win. Don't forget. What I do is I attach a meaningful reward to doing what I want the players to do so that they're incentivized to do it and they do it on their own. And by doing it on their own, they bring about the end of the game. So, or they bring the game toward its conclusion. The worst experience is to find, like Twilight Imperium. The first time I played that I was like winning on the battlefield and realized I had 0 points and it was like 4 rounds in and I was hopelessly I was just not going to win. It's like you get 10 points. 1 round of the game could be like 1 hour of time and you get like 1 point per round. And here I am 4 hours into the game with 0 points at all. And just like, I thought I was doing what was good, but now I'm hopelessly behind. And it was fun for me because I got to like ruin other people's fun time with my huge army, but it didn't feel good to know that I just had no chance of winning. So the core gameplay experience, I need to be able to detect as a player, even a first time player, like what I should actually be paying attention to, So anyway, so that's I think that's a pretty good discussion on I guess the core gameplay loop that and the simpler and easier it is to execute, the more satisfying it is for players. And the more they'll want to do it. Right. So thanks, Evan, for being a part of the podcast. And of course, Sean, as always, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And let's have Robot Richard send us on out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.
Tabletone is a phenomenal app. I use it every time I play tabletop role-playing games with my family. It greatly enhances the immersive experience. In fact, it's night and day using it and not using it. It can also be used for board games or any card game. It's great background music. It's made by a company based in Austria who have their own studio, who've developed their own software specifically to cater to your specific needs within the different game settings. So you can control intensity, there's different background noises. You can get it for free, and there's also a trial that you can run for 2 weeks that will give you full access to their entire catalog of sounds and audio. Definitely check it out. Link is in the description. Visit tabletone.app for more details.